Meet Romeo. He's an American who uses US dollars every single day. Now, Romeo wants to travel to Germany, which uses the euro. But when he goes to exchange his money, he discovers something strange. 1 US dollar equals only 90 euro cents. Then Romeo flies to Vietnam, and things get even weirder. 1 US dollar equals 25,000 Vietnamese dong. Wait, what? Why does money have completely different values in different countries? Why isn't $1 just equal to 1 euro and 1 dong everywhere? And why do exchange rates change every single second? Today, we're diving deep into the world of currencies, exchange rates, and why money isn't just equal. Let's figure this out. Before we explain why currencies have different values, let's quickly cover how we got here. For a long time, money was directly backed by precious metals, mainly gold. This system was called the gold standard. Under the gold standard, each country's currency represented a fixed amount of gold stored in government vaults. This kept exchange rates stable because countries couldn't just print unlimited money. You could only print as much money as you had gold to back it up. But as economies grew and global trade expanded, the gold standard became a problem. Countries needed more money to fuel their growth, but they couldn't find enough gold, especially during wars and economic crises. By the 1970s, most countries abandoned the gold standard entirely and switched to something called fiat money. Fiat money is currency that has value simply because the government declares it does and people believe it. It's not backed by gold, silver, or any physical asset. Some people call it fake money for this reason. If you want a deeper dive into fiat currency, let me know in the comments and I'll make a dedicated video. Here's the key difference. Since fiat money has no physical backing like gold, its value depends entirely on whether people want it or not. If lots of people want a currency, they compete to get it, and its value goes up. If nobody wants it, its value crashes. So the value of fiat money comes down to supply and demand. That's why the US dollar is so valuable. Tons of people and countries want it. Meanwhile, currencies from struggling economies, like Venezuela during its hyperinflation crisis, plummet because nobody, not even Venezuelans, wants to hold it. Now let's explore the main factors that affect supply and demand for currencies. Factor number 1. Inflation. Inflation is what a currency starts losing its purchasing power. Simply put, it means there's more money circulating compared to the amount of goods and services available. I have another video explaining why don't we just print more money if you want to understand this concept deeper. When a country has high inflation, its currency loses value. Why? Because nobody wants to buy or hold a currency that's constantly losing purchasing power. Here's an example. In 2020, you could buy 2 loaves of bread for $10. But after high inflation, by 2026, that same $10 only buys you 1 loaf. You're getting less for the same amount of money. Real-world example, Zimbabwe. In the 1980s, the Zimbabwe dollar was actually worth more than the US dollar. 1 Zimbabwe dollar equaled 1.35 US dollars. But then everything collapsed. Failed land reforms, economic mismanagement, corruption, international sanctions, and reckless money printing destroyed the currency's value. By the 2000s, 1 US dollar was worth almost 600,000 Zimbabwe dollars. The government tried fixing it by redenominating the currency multiple times, but eventually gave up and started using foreign currencies like the US dollar and South African rand. Recent news shows Zimbabwe is trying to bring back its own currency again, so props for persistence, Zimbabwe. Factor number 2, interest rates. You've probably heard about interest rates in the news and wondered why they matter so much. Let me explain. Interest rates are the cost of borrowing money, expressed as a percentage. If you borrow $500 at a 5% interest rate, you have to pay back $500 plus an extra $25 in interest. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US, set these interest rates for their countries. Here's where it gets interesting. When a country has high interest rates, it offers better returns on investments. This attracts foreign investors who need to buy that country's currency to invest there. This increases demand and strengthens that currency. For example, let's say you want to invest in government bonds. Government bonds are basically loans you give to the government. In return, they pay you back with interest over time. Say you buy a $1,000 government bond with a 5% interest rate for 10 years. The government borrows your $1,000 and pays you 5% interest, which is $50, every year for 10 years. The logic is simple. Higher interest rate equals higher return on investment. So if U.S. interest rates are higher than Germany's, investors might sell their euros and buy U.S. dollars to invest in American bonds or savings accounts with better returns. This increased demand for the U.S. dollar strengthens the U.S. dollar. On the flip side, if U.S. interest rates drop, investors look elsewhere for better returns. Demand for the U.S. dollar decreases and its value falls. But wait, can't a country just set super high interest rates to attract investors? Not really. Remember, interest is the cost of borrowing money. High interest rates make it expensive for people and businesses to borrow. If borrowing becomes too expensive, fewer people buy homes, start businesses, or invest in growth. This slows down the entire economy and can lead to unemployment. That's why central banks have to carefully balance interest rates based on their country's economic situation. And that's why everyone holds their breath when the Federal Reserve announces U.S. interest rate changes, because it affects the entire global economy. Factor number 3, political and economic stability. When China opened its economy to foreign investors in the late 1970s, companies from around the world rushed to set up operations in China. To build factories in China, they needed Chinese yuan to buy land, construct buildings, pay workers, and cover expenses. This created massive demand for the yuan, strengthening its value and flooding China with foreign capital. That's why almost every country actively promotes itself to foreign investors. They want to attract business and investment. But investors won't invest just anywhere. They look for countries with stable politics and economies. Why? A stable government means consistent rules and laws. For example, if a country promises low taxes to attract foreign businesses, but then suddenly raises them, those businesses lose money. If a country keeps changing its regulations, businesses won't feel safe investing there. Similarly, if there are constant protests, strikes, or political unrest, it disrupts production and makes it hard for businesses to operate. Economic stability matters too. A stable economy means the currency is less likely to lose value suddenly. If a country has massive debt, high inflation, or frequent economic crises, foreign investors worry they'll lose money. Bottom line, stable countries attract more investment, which keeps their currency strong. Factor number 4, trade balance, exports versus imports. When Japan exports cars to other countries, those countries need Japanese yen to buy the cars. This creates demand for the yen. When Japan imports coal from Australia, they need Australian dollars to pay for it. This increases demand for the Australian dollar. Most countries try to export more than they import so that other nations need their currency, making it stronger. The ultimate example, the U.S. petrodollar system. When the U.S. convinced oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia to sell oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, it created constant global demand for the dollar. Since almost every country needs oil, they have to acquire U.S. dollars to buy it. This made the U.S. dollar the world's dominant currency, strengthening the U.S. economy and global influence. This system is known as the petrodollar. Though recently, there have been rumors that Saudi Arabia might accept other currencies too. Let me know if you want a dedicated video on this topic. On the other end of the spectrum, small island nations like Tuvalu in the Pacific don't have much to export, so their local currencies aren't widely used. Instead, they adopt stronger foreign currencies like the US dollar or Australian dollar to make trade easier. Factor number 5, fixed exchange rates. Currency pegging. Want a stable currency without all the hassle? Just peg your currency to a stronger, more stable one. Example, Brunei and Singapore. Brunei, a small oil-rich sultanate in Southeast Asia, pegs its currency 1-to-1 to the Singapore dollar. Both currencies have exactly the same value. That's why you can use Singapore dollars in Brunei and vice versa. Example, Belize and the US dollar. Belize, a small country next to Mexico, pegs its currency to the US dollar at a fixed rate. 1 Belize dollar always equals 0.5 US dollars. So if you want to exchange US dollars for Belize dollars, you don't need to check exchange rates. Just double the amount. Easy, right? The trade-off, pegging makes currency stable and predictable, but it also makes your economy completely dependent on the stronger country's economy. If the US dollar falls, the Belize dollar falls too. If one currency lives, the other lives. If one dies, the other dies. So now you might be thinking, why don't all countries just use the same currency, like a world dollar? Then we wouldn't need exchange rates or any of this complexity. It sounds great in theory, but it's incredibly complicated in practice. Let's look at the euro as an example. The euro is super convenient for people living in the Eurozone. You can travel across countries without exchanging money. But here's the problem. Every country in the Eurozone had to give up control over its own monetary policy to the European Central Bank. This means individual countries can't adjust their own interest rates or money supply to solve their specific economic problems, because it would affect all the other countries too. Real example, the Greek financial crisis in 2009. When Greece faced a financial crisis, the effects spread across the entire Eurozone. Germany and other stronger economies had to help Greece bail out, which they weren't happy about. Now imagine this on a global scale. If the entire world used one currency, one country's economic disaster would become everyone's problem. You could be living your best life and suddenly face inflation and crisis just because a country thousands of miles away mismanaged its economy. That's why a single world currency is extremely risky and unlikely to happen. Here's another question you might have. Should every country try to make their currency as strong as possible? Actually, no. Different countries have different economic needs. Countries that import a lot, like Singapore, benefit from a strong currency because it makes imports cheaper. Countries that export a lot, like China, actually benefit from a weaker currency because it makes their products cheaper and more competitive for other countries to buy. That's why China has been accused of currency devaluation, purposely keeping its currency weaker to boost exports. How does this work? I'll explain it in a future video. If you want me to cover this and other topics, please like and subscribe. So there you have it, the main reasons why currencies have different values: inflation, interest rates, political and economic stability, trade balance, exports versus imports, and currency pegging. Exchange rates aren't random. They're driven by economics, politics, and global trade. If you found this helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos breaking down complex topics simply. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.